Introductions are really important. I mean, don't believe me? Well, why are you watching this video, if not for its introduction? What, because of the title and thumbnail? They had Ratchet and Clank in it, and now you're waiting for me to get to the point? Okay, fine. Let's look at the introduction of this guy. Now, Going Commando is not some masterclass in game design that everybody should study. I'm sorry, it's good, it's not that good, but it does make for a really good case study. Okay, keep in mind, you probably have a pretty good understanding of how this game works, but for the sake of analysis, let's pretend that you don't, and let's see what the first 10 minutes of Going Commando can teach us.
Welcome back to Behind the Hero. Tonight's heroes are the duo who recently restored peace and order to our galaxy, Ratchet and Clank.
Alright, I'm gonna pause it right there. And yes, there is already something to analyze here, because did you know that these two were called Ratchet and Clank? I mean, probably, but if you didn't, you do now.
Ratchet and Clank.
That's the kind of mindset we're working with here. Imagine that you know nothing.
So, gentlemen, tell us about your latest incredible adventures.
Well, as you can imagine, we've been pretty busy.
Now, this is a minor one, but if you notice, Ratchet is the one who speaks first. Now, again, you probably already know that this is Ratchet and this is Clank. There are a lot of other context clues that enforce that idea, but this helps. So I'm not doing the remote thing again, just...
I guess no one needs a hero right now.
That is a really important beat of characterization. For newcomers, not so much. Although it does work as, general characterization. But for those who played the first game, that contextualizes its character shift from the more egocentric Ratchet of the first game into the version in this game, which is, less abrasive, while still maintaining some of his edge.
Welcome!
What the?
I'm Abercrombie Fizzwidget, founder of the Megacorp Company in the Bogon Galaxy.
Okay, that is an interesting one. That line, and the one before, aren't said in the style that Quarkwidget uses throughout the rest of the game, replacing words with sound-alikes.
Should I take it out?
Affirmulous!
He says this line completely correctly, because this is all important information that can't be muddled. This is Fizzwidget, who works for the Megacorp Company in the Bogon Galaxy. Another important detail if you played the first game, this line establishes that this is a new galaxy, and it'll have new rules. And even if the detail of Bogon being a different galaxy slips past you, either you didn't play the first game or you just weren't paying attention, Ratchet's
Bogon?
makes it clear that he doesn't know what that is, so it must be something new. Which is, of course, then followed by a short monologue of nonsense.
I'm sorry to incapacitate you, but our entire galaxy is in a very precocious situation. I must humbly request your sustenance on a mission of dire urgitude, a mission of superfluous peril, a mission of unequivocal imperitude.
Did that make any sense?
Now, Clank's line there might not seem important, but it is. Remember that the target audience of this game, children, might not have amazing language comprehension skills, enough to be able to get the joke, but it still might fly past them without Clank here to confirm that that is in fact nonsense.
So, you need me to go on a dangerous mission in another galaxy.
And then Ratchet translates this information, just in case you couldn't pass it. And then we get...
We'll do it!
We will?
This is another line of characterization, this time for Clank. Now, it is a little bit more forced a character shift than Ratchet, but it does give some explanation as to why Clank isn't in the first part of the game. Now, I could go into how they're effectively flipping the character motivations for our two leads from the first game, but in the interest of time, let's just go to the gameplay. Besides, other than some jokes, not much is happening in this cutscene past this point.
Ratchet reporting. I'm on final approach to coordinates 37 Alpha.
Good luck. I'm counting on you.
Affirmative. Beginning radio silence.
Okay, I know I just said I would skip to the gameplay, but I gotta talk about this first. The music. The music in Ratchet 1 was quite scrappy, not in the sense of its quality, but stylistically it was made in a way that feels almost thrown together. Despite not being thrown together, it's actually quite cohesive and catchy. It's what a lot of sampling will do. And it fits the game's aesthetic, less sleek sci-fi and more retro sci-fi. Going Commando, with its first piece of music, immediately tells you what it's about. It's leaning into that sleeker sci-fi aesthetic, letting its regular instrumentation drive the track rather than its synthesized samples. And it's in stereo, but that doesn't mean anything, it's just a technical upgrade. It still has that same sampled quality the first game had, it's just less prominent. Some tracks lean into that more heavily, some less so, and this first track is somewhere in the middle. It's kind of like the game, its aesthetic is more in line with sleek sci-fi, comparing the Lancer to the Blaster should make that obvious, but it doesn't lean away from the aesthetic of the first game completely. It more shifts from a scrappier tone that fits a game about a scrappy mechanic into a more industrial tone, as the game is about the company that you work for. If I knew more about music theory, I would explain why this track feels Commando-y, but I don't, so I won't. But suffice it to say, this track feels Commando-y, which is in line with the more Commando-y underpinning of the game's plot. That's enough about the music though, let's actually talk about the gameplay. Okay, for this section, let's imagine that you have little to no understanding of how this game specifically functions. I'm going to assume a small understanding of how games work on the whole, because quite frankly, analysing this from the perspective of someone with no experience playing games is too much effort and I can't be bothered. Anyway, once you're finally given control, this is the first thing that you're shown. Do you notice anything? It might not seem important, but the camera is not pointing in the correct direction. It's 90 degrees from where it will sit for the rest of the game, staring right up Ratchet's ass. Now, the intention for this is almost certainly just because it was the best place to put this camera for the specific room layout to show you entering, and not to be an early lesson in the fact that the objective won't always be wherever the game points you, but it can. Alright, so you go step on this button because it's a flashing, glowing button, and only then does the camera snap to where it will remain for the rest of the game. Along with the next room being a narrow corridor, you know where to go. Forward, you go forward. Here's where the actual pretty cool design comes in. So your path forward involves you killing these enemies and then jumping up this ladder to go to the next room. Now, other than the help desk, which I'll get into later, telling you the buttons to press to make the gun go pew pew, notice where these enemies come from. They drop down from the ceiling. They only ever drop down from the ceiling 3 times, and only in this level. As far as I'm aware, I didn't go through the entire game to check. And it's a very deliberate action. It pulls your attention up to where the next area you need to go is, so you know to look for it. So you go up to this ladder looking thing, press the button that is universal game language for ascend, and wow, look at that, you can climb ladders. That's information you have now. You now know that you can climb stuff, which would be useful if you ever had to use it again more than once. Now, here are the first set of crates you'll probably actually break. There are some off to the side in the first combat corridor, but let's be honest, you missed them. Unless you didn't, in which case, good job, I guess. But either way, you're gonna break these, either with the Lancer or by mashing square, because that's the hit button. I'm gonna skip ahead just a tad to this more open combat section here. It's your first bit of combat on a more lateral plane. The first 2 happen pretty much right in front of you. So this is your introduction to having to aim. At least in some sense, look around is probably more accurate, to hit these enemies. Also a fun detail you probably have noticed, these guys are positioned way back against these windows, so it's likely that they'll be punted out of the window with this fun animation of them flying away. Believe it or not, this is actually teaching you something. Not something extremely useful, but something nonetheless. This game has environmental damage. It's not used often, but it is there, and this, however brief, is an introduction to it. This part isn't that interesting game design wise, so let's just jump ahead to the gravity bomb introduction.
Try using the gravity bomb against those enemies.
These messages, known in-game as help desk messages, are not very elegant. Anytime a game has to resort to telling you what to do can feel jarring. Sometimes it's necessary, like when it tells you what buttons to press, but here it's not quite as necessary. This help desk message is literally telling you to use the gravity bomb on these enemies, but what it's actually trying to tell you is that you can switch weapons. There's no way to know that you can do that unless you either already know, or you stumble upon it by chance. Actually, that's not true, they do tell you right at the very start. I just missed that when I was taking my notes, but I still think they should be showing it when they're actually teaching you to switch weapons and not just right at the beginning when it doesn't even fucking matter. Anyway, that's what all these next enemy encounters are for. They're all set up to encourage you to use different weapons. First, by showing you that a group of enemies might suit a weapon with an area of effect, and second by, well, we'll get to that, because before that, we have this cutscene, which I'm only going to briefly mention because there's not a lot going on. Really all it's saying is that this is the bad guy and they've got the thing we're trying to get. It might also be set up for Angela's clumsiness, something I didn't actually notice until now, but other than that, it's not really interesting. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, gravity bomb combat, or just after the scene, non-gravity bomb combat. This section is kind of set up so that the Lancer is more effective, with the enemies coming in one by one, but the speed at which they do that means that if you're not comfortable switching weapons during combat yet, the gravity bomb is still effective. And then we go down here, we fight these guys, we get interrupted by a cutscene for some fucking reason, and then we learn to aim against enemies that you can't actually aim at. And then our last interesting detail, these two groups of enemies. This group is the last one to come out, and that's the direction that you need to go. They're focusing your attention there. Okay, it kind of slid a little downhill near the end there, but that's okay. You see, the reason why this introduction is interesting is not because it's really good. It's actually not. I know I've been kind of hyping it up this entire video, but in reality it's paced strangely, doesn't really flow from scene to scene properly, and isn't really doing much of anything that I would consider to be interesting. Compare it to something like the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild, or the first test chambers of Portal, and it's not even close. Those are what great introductions look like. But even still, you saw how much detail I was able to pull from this comparatively basic introduction. There is so much effort that goes into game design, and not even just in the technical sense that we normally think of when we think of putting a bunch of work into a game. And worse still, it's fucking unquantifiable. If a game looks technically impressive, it's easy to see, but the actual subtleties of the design of the mechanics, of level design and system building, of economy balancing and creating combat scenarios, so often goes unnoticed. The introduction is just the easiest place to see this. It's where the design is at its most obvious. It's quite literally designed so that you can pick up all of these details without ever having played the game before. The same is still happening throughout the rest of the game. They can just be more subtle about it. Because yes, it is a shame that game design goes unnoticed, but going unnoticed is also the mark of good game design. To influence the player without them knowing, to teach them without them realizing. When you dig a little bit deeper, it's amazing just how designed these games are. And let's see what the first 10 minutes of going Commando can teach us. Just break my game face real quick. There's a fucking spider in it! There's a spider in my game, dude. Get out of there.